June 1941. The sun rises over the endless fields of the Soviet Union, glinting off the polished hulls of German panzers as they rumble eastward. In the command tents, laughter echoes. German officers, veterans of blitzkrieg triumphs, pass around a Soviet intelligence report describing a new Russian tank. Clumsy, underpowered, poorly built, one commander, Oberstleutnant Franz, waves the paper dismissively and jokes. If the Russians build tanks like they build tractors, we'll be in Moscow by Christmas. The men around him chuckle, their confidence unshakable. After all, the Wehrmacht's armored spearheads have crushed every foe in their path. The panzers are the pride of Germany, symbols of unstoppable power and precision engineering. What could the Soviets possibly field that would threaten them? But as the columns advance deeper into the Soviet heartland, rumors begin to swirl among the ranks. Stories of shells bouncing harmlessly off strange, sloped armor. Reports of German tanks bogged down while a new Russian machine glides effortlessly through mud and snow. The laughter fades, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. Little do these commanders know, the war on the Eastern Front is about to change forever, and the tank they mocked will soon become their greatest nightmare. Before the thunder of war rolled across the Russian steppes, the German army stood at the pinnacle of armored warfare. Years of innovation and battlefield experience had forged a doctrine that prized speed, coordination, and precision. The world had watched in awe as German panzers sliced through Poland, France, and the Low Countries, their victories swift and seemingly effortless. At the heart of this armored juggernaut were the Panzer III and Panzer IV machines that embodied the Wehrmacht's faith in engineering and tactics. The Panzer III, with its 50mm main gun and well-drilled crews, was designed for tank versus tank combat. Its slightly heavier cousin, the Panzer IV, boasted a short-barreled 75mm gun, ideal for supporting infantry and blasting fortifications. Both tanks were fast, reliable, and most importantly proven in battle. German officers believed their machines were the best in the world, and their doctrine of blitz or lightning war depended on the panzer's ability to outmaneuver and outgun any opponent. When it came to the Red Army, German intelligence painted a picture of mediocrity. Soviet tanks, they claimed, were crude, outdated, and poorly maintained. The most common models, like the T-26 and BT series, were lightly armored and armed, no match for German steel. Reports of a new Soviet tank were dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. The Russians are brave, but their machines are primitive. One German general remarked, "We have nothing to fear." This sense of superiority ran deep. German tank crews trained relentlessly, confident that their discipline and technology would carry the day. The idea that the Soviets could produce anything to rival the Panzer was almost laughable. As the invasion of the Soviet Union loomed, the mood in the armored divisions was one of anticipation, not anxiety, yet far to the east. In secret factories and proving grounds, Soviet engineers were working on something that defied German expectations. A new kind of tank was taking shape, one that would soon shatter the myth of German invincibility and force the world to rethink the future of armored warfare. While German officers scoffed at the idea of Soviet innovation, a quiet revolution was underway deep within the Soviet Union. In the industrial city of Kharkiv, a team of engineers led by Mikhail Koshkin toiled day and night, driven by a singular vision to create a tank that could survive the brutal realities of the Eastern Front. The result of their labor was the T34, a machine unlike anything the world had seen. The T34's design was born from hard lessons learned in the Spanish Civil War and the harsh Russian winters. Koshkin and his team knew that speed and firepower alone would not be enough. Their tank needed to be rugged, reliable, and able to operate in mud, snow, and ice. The T-34's most striking feature was its sloped armor, angled to deflect incoming shells and dramatically increase its effective thickness. This innovation, simple yet brilliant, would soon prove to be a game-changer on the battlefield. Beneath its angular hull, the T-34 was powered by a robust V2 diesel engine, far less likely to catch fire than the gasoline engines used by many German tanks. Its wide tracks allowed it to glide over soft ground where panzers would bog down, and its 76.2mm main gun packed a punch that could pierce enemy armor at range. To the untrained eye, the T-34 looked ungainly, even crude. Soviet engineers joked that it was an ugly duckling, but they knew its beauty lay in its simplicity and strength. Secrecy surrounded the T-34's development. Prototypes were tested under the cover of darkness, and even high-ranking Soviet officers were kept in the dark about its true capabilities. Koshkin himself famously drove one of the first T-34s from Kharkiv to Moscow, a grueling journey of over 1,200 kilometers to prove its reliability to skeptical officials. Along the way, the tank plowed through mud, forded rivers, and never once broke down. For the men who built it, the T-34 was more than just a machine. It was a symbol of Soviet resilience and ingenuity. Yet, as the first units rolled off the assembly lines and into the hands of Red Army crews, one question lingered in every mind. How would this untested creation fare against the might of the German panzer divisions? The answer would soon shake the world. When Operation Barbarossa erupted in June 1941, German tank crews surged across the border, expecting another swift victory. The first days were a blur of burning villages and shattered Soviet columns. But as the panzers pressed deeper into Soviet territory, something strange began to happen. Reports filtered back to headquarters. German shells, which had torn through every enemy before, were now ricocheting off the armor of a new, unfamiliar tank. In the forests near Duke, a Panzer III commander named Hans Weber recalled his shock. "We fired at one of those Russian tanks from less than 300 meters. He later wrote, "The shell just bounced off. It was as if we were shooting at a stone wall." The tank in question was a T-34, its sloped armor shrugging off hits that would have destroyed any other vehicle. German tactics, honed for years against weaker foes, suddenly panzers found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered, their crews scrambling for cover as T-34s advanced relentlessly. On the Soviet side, the reaction was a mix of pride and disbelief. Sergeant Ivan Petrov, a T-34 gunner, described his first battle. "The Germans kept firing, but we felt only the hammering of shells against our armor. We pushed forward, and their tanks began to retreat. For the first time, we saw fear in their eyes." The T-34's wide tracks allowed it to cross terrain that bogged down German vehicles, and its powerful gun could destroy panzers at ranges where the Germans were helpless. Chaos reigned on the battlefield. German anti-tank guns, once the bane of Soviet armor, proved almost useless against the T-34. Commanders frantically called for air support or heavier weapons, but the Red Army pressed its advantage. In some sectors, entire panzer units were forced to withdraw, abandoning wrecked vehicles and stunned by the ferocity of the Soviet counterattacks. The myth of German invincibility began to crack. For the first time, Wehrmacht officers realized they faced an enemy who could match and even surpass their prized machines. Yet, as the front lines shifted and the scale of the T-34's impact became clear, a chilling realization set in among the Germans. If this was just the beginning, what horrors awaited them deeper in the Soviet Union? The real nightmare was only beginning. The summer of 1941 had been a season of triumph for the German army, but as autumn crept across the Russian landscape, the tide began to shift. Nowhere was this change more dramatic than at the small city of Minsk, where the myth of German armored supremacy would be shattered in a storm of steel and fire. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, was leading his 2nd Panzer Group toward Moscow. His confidence was unshakable until his spearhead reached the outskirts of Mitsensk in early October. Here, the Germans expected another easy victory, but instead, they ran headlong into a wall of Soviet resistance. Waiting for them were the men of Colonel Mikhail Katakov's 4th Tank Brigade, armed with the mysterious new T-34s. The battle began at dawn, with German panzers advancing in tight formation across open fields. Suddenly, the ground erupted as T-34s burst from cover, their engines roaring. The Germans opened fire, but their 37mm and 50mm guns proved woefully inadequate. Shells sparked harmlessly off the T-34's sloped armor, while the Soviet tanks returned fire with deadly accuracy. One German officer, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Born, later recalled, "It was as if our rounds were made of rubber. The T-34s came at us like ghosts, unstoppable." The technical reasons for this disaster were clear. The T-34's armor, angled at 45 degrees, deflected shots that would have penetrated flat plates. Its wide tracks allowed it to maneuver through mud and debris, while German tanks bogged down or became easy targets. The T-34's 76.2mm gun could destroy a Panzer III or IV at over a kilometer. While the Germans had too close to dangerously short range to even hope for a kill, the psychological impact was devastating. German crews, who had once laughed at Soviet tanks, now found themselves outmatched and outgunned. Panic spread as T-34s appeared seemingly out of nowhere, striking quickly and then vanishing into the forests. Guderian himself was forced to admit the scale of the problem. Writing in his diary, "Our panzer forces are suffering heavy losses. The Russian T-34 is a very fine tank indeed." For the Soviets, the victory at Metsensk was a moment of vindication. Colonel Katakov's brigade had not only halted the German advance, but had done so with a new weapon that inspired awe and fear. Soviet tankers, many of them barely trained, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and hope. Their success sent shockwaves through the German high command. In the aftermath, German engineers scrambled to study captured T-34s, desperate to understand and counter this new threat. The Battle of Mitsensk marked the beginning of an arms race on the Eastern Front, as both sides raced to build better, deadlier machines. For the first time, the Germans realized that victory would not come easily on, that the Soviets had more surprises in store. The age of the Panzer had met its match, and the war for armored supremacy was only just beginning. The shock of Mitsensk reverberated through the German high command like a thunderclap. For the first time, the Wehrmacht's armored spearheads had been blunted. not by numbers or terrain, but by a single, superior machine. The T-34's dominance forced the Germans into a frantic period of adaptation and escalation. As they struggled to regain their edge on the battlefield. In the immediate aftermath, German crews improvised. Field workshops welded makeshift armor plates onto the fronts of Panzer, IIs, and IVS, hoping to deflect the T-34's powerful shells. Commanders ordered their gunners to aim for the T-34's tracks or rear, the few vulnerable spots on an otherwise formidable opponent. New tactics emerged almost overnight. Ambushes from concealed positions, coordinated attacks with anti-tank guns, and the use of close air support to compensate for the Panzer's shortcomings. Every engagement became a deadly chess match, with German crews relying on cunning and teamwork to survive. But these stopgap measures were not enough. The German High Command knew that only a new generation of tanks could restore their battlefield supremacy. In a flurry of meetings and design sessions, engineers were ordered to study captured T-34s and create something even more formidable. The result was a technical arms race that would define the next phase of the war. The first answer was the Tiger Aja behemoth of steel, bristling with an 88mm gun capable of destroying a T-34 at extreme range. Its armor was nearly impenetrable, but the Tiger was slow, mechanically complex, and expensive to produce. Hot on its heels came the Panther, a tank that borrowed heavily from the T-34's design, sloped armor, wide tracks, and a high-velocity 75mm gun. The Panther was faster and more agile than the Tiger, and its gun could pierce Soviet armor with ease. Yet both tanks suffered from teething problems, breakdowns, supply shortages, and the ever-present threat of Soviet counterattacks. The human cost of this arms race was staggering. German crews faced longer, more grueling battles, often outnumbered and outgunned. Tank factories worked around the clock, churning out new machines as fast as possible, while mechanics and engineers struggled to keep them running in the mud and cold of the Eastern Front. For every technological leap, there was a price paid in sweat, blood, and shattered steel. Still, the Germans pressed on, determined to reclaim their lost dominance. The arrival of the Panther and Tiger tanks marked a new chapter in armored warfare 1, defined by epic duels between giants of steel. Yet even as these new machines rolled onto the battlefield, the Soviets were not standing still. The T-34 was evolving, its armor thickening, its gun growing more powerful. The stage was set for the greatest tank battles in history, where skill, innovation, and sheer willpower would decide the fate of nations. And as both sides prepared for the next clash, one question loomed: who would emerge victorious in the ultimate contest of armored might? The summer of 1943 brought the world to the edge of a steel storm. On the rolling plains near the city of Kursk, two titanic armies prepared for a clash that would decide the fate of the Eastern Front. The Germans, desperate to regain the initiative, assembled their most fearsome weapons, hundreds of new Panthers and Tigers. Supported by veteran Panzer crews, opposing them stood the Red Army, dug in and determined, with thousands of T-34s ready to meet the enemy head-on at dawn on July 5th. The earth shook as the German offensive began. Waves of Panzers surged forward, their guns blazing, but the Soviets were ready. T-34s burst from camouflaged positions, racing across fields of wheat and fire. The air was thick with smoke and the deafening roar of engines and explosions. In the chaos, tank crews fought at point-blank range, sometimes within meters of each other. Shells ricocheted, armor plates shattered, and the ground was littered with burning wrecks. For the T-34 crews, the battle was a test of nerves and resolve. Many were young, barely trained, but they fought with a ferocity born of desperation and hope. Sergeant Nikolai Sokolov, a T-34 commander, later recalled, "We knew the Germans had new tanks, but we trusted our machines and each other. We fought for every meter, every hill, every comrade lost." The T-34's speed and maneuverability allowed Soviet crews to outflank heavier German tanks, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the enemy could respond. On the German side, frustration mounted. The new Panthers rushed into battle, suffered mechanical failures, and bogged down in the thick mud. Even the mighty Tigers found themselves swarmed by nimble T-34s, their crews overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the Soviet defense. General Model, commanding the German Ninth Army, described the battle as a cauldron of fire and steel, where every advantage was met with a new Soviet tactic. By the end of the battle, the fields around Kursk were littered with the twisted remains of hundreds of tanks. The German offensive had failed, and the Red Army surged forward, never to be stopped again. The T-34, once mocked and underestimated, had become the symbol of Soviet resilience and victory. Kursk was not just a battle, it was the moment the T-34 changed the course of the war, proving that courage, innovation, and determination could overcome even the most formidable of foes. In the wake of Kursk, the T-34's legend only grew. The Red Army pressed its advantage, rolling westward with wave after wave of these rugged, reliable tanks. For German soldiers, the sight of a T-34 on the horizon became a symbol of relentless, Soviet strength, a reminder that the days of easy victories were over. The psychological shift was profound. Where once there had been arrogance and mockery, now there was respect, even fear. The T-34 had not just changed the battlefield, it had changed the very mindset of the men who fought against it. That the influence of the T-34 rippled far beyond the Eastern Front. Its revolutionary design, sloped armor, wide tracks, and a powerful yet simple engine became the blueprint for future generations of tanks around the world. The German Panther, the American Pershing, and even post-war Soviet tanks all bore the mark of the T-34's innovations. Military engineers studied its features, seeking to capture the balance of firepower, protection, and mobility that had made it so effective. For the Soviet Union, the T-34 became more than just a weapon. It was a national icon. Wartime propaganda celebrated the tank and its crews, immortalizing their courage in films, posters, and songs. After the war, veterans gathered at reunions, sharing stories of battles survived and comrades lost. Many T-34s were preserved as monuments, standing silent guard over the cities and villages they had helped to liberate. In the broader arc of World War II, the T-34's story is one of transformation. It began as an underestimated, ugly duckling, dismissed by its enemies and doubted by its own creators. Through grit, innovation, and the sacrifice of countless crews, it became the backbone of the Soviet war effort and a symbol of hope in the darkest days. The T-34's legacy endures not just in museums and memorials, but in the very concept of modern armored warfare, a testament to the power of ingenuity and the will to endure against all odds. Years after the war, a former German tank commander was asked what he remembered most about the Eastern Front. He paused, then replied, "The T-34. At first, we laughed. By the end, we feared it more than anything else." His words capture the remarkable journey of a machine that began as the butt of jokes and ended as a legend, reshaping not only the course of battles, but the very way armies thought about war. The T-34's story is a testament to the dangers of arrogance and the power of innovation. It reminds us that history is often written not by the most celebrated or the most beautiful, but by the underestimated and the overlooked. The laughter of 1941 gave way to the hard-earned respect of 1945. As the T-34 rolled through the ruins of Berlin, its legacy secured. As we look back on this chapter of World War II, one question lingers. How many other weapons, dismissed or ignored in their time, quietly changed the fate of nations? The story of the T-34 is a reminder to never underestimate the underdog, because sometimes the most unlikely contender becomes the hero of history.